Домой. Ты после него придешь ко мне, пока мы не там.
This is what a woman had to say after shooting her own son.
I would like to say something.
Go ahead.
I'm innocent. You all. You're garbage.
She had gained custody of her son instead of her husband only 10 days prior. She was arrested after police pulled her over for a traffic violation and found the body in the trunk.
Eli will forever be missed by so many people that loved him. He will forever and always be in our hearts.
Police were unsure whether she killed for the life insurance money or because of mental health reasons.
This is why you should fear for your life if you buy or sell items on Facebook Marketplace. 56-year-old Denise Williams of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, wanted to buy a refrigerator for her boyfriend. She found one listed on Facebook Marketplace. The seller was 26-year-old Joshua Gorgon. Denise went to his apartment alone to check out the fridge, but never came out. On Monday, she was reported missing by her family, and police were able to track her using her phone and information from a Facebook account. She was found dead from multiple stab wounds at Joshua's apartment. Joshua was arrested and charged with criminal homicide. When he was interviewed by Cambria County detectives, he admitted to stabbing Williams to death with a kitchen knife following an argument over the cost of the refrigerator.
Have you guys heard about the 9-year-old girl who died from having lice? On March 22nd, 2022, a 9-year-old girl was found deceased by police in her home where she lived with her mother Sandra, her grandmother Elizabeth, and her 2 brothers in Arizona. When police first saw her lifeless body, they noticed a large amount of bugs on her face, which they later realized were lice. According to the medical examiner, the girl died from anemia, which was connected to an infection from the head lice. A few hours before the little girl passed away, Sandra texted her boyfriend and said, "Oh my God, babe, listen, I'm in my room and my mom was calling me and asked if I can check her pulse to make sure she isn't dying." So the boyfriend urged Sandra to take her daughter to the hospital, but she didn't, and she passed away 2.5 hours later. Sandra admitted that her daughter was sick for quite some time and she was vomiting, had a fever, she had trouble breathing, and could not walk on her own. Both Sandra and her mother Elizabeth have been arrested and charged with murder.
Marlene Warren, this is the scariest bro. This is true nightmare what happened to her. This happened in the 90s and she was from Florida. She had a son, and this one day, bro, I don't know exactly the time it was, somebody knocks on their door. She goes and answers the door, right? And it's a clown at her door.
That's
right?
scary as
I'm already knowing, bro. Like, that's why I said it's true nightmare. She opens the door. She's like, what the hell? The clown hands her like this like bundle of balloons and is basically saying like, you're the best and all this other shit, right? And then the clown pulls out a gun and shoots her straight in the head.
holy
Kills her in front of her son, bro, and takes off, which is crazy as right? And by the way, she had a husband too. My bad, I forgot to even say that.
Yeah.
The husband wasn't home though, so he ends up coming through. You know, the police, everybody comes through. They find out what happens. He just tells them that a random clown came to the house and
shot my mom
and killed her. Right? They're grieving. The whole family's grieving, shit like that. The dad ends up moving on in 2002. Right? So he ends up remarrying. He gets with this girl. They're together for like a cool minute, bro, right? So they start interviewing, you know, him, his new girl, shit like that. They're asking all these questions. And it gets to the point where one of them cracked. The new girlfriend
was the clown.
Wow. But this is what's crazy though, right?
This mother murdered her 3 kids during a psychosis episode. On January 24th, 2023, 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy took the life of her 5-year-old daughter Cora, 3-year-old son Dawson, and 7-month-old baby Callan. On this day at 4:53 p.m., Lindsay asked her husband Patrick to pick up some dinner at a restaurant not too far from the house. About an hour later, Patrick returned home and noticed that there was absolute silence. He called for Lindsay's name, and after no response, he went into the bedroom and noticed that the window was open. Lindsay had jumped out the window in an attempt to take her own life, but she was still alive. This is where things get really sad. Patrick went to the basement and found all 3 kids with exercise cords around their necks. Both Cora and Dawson passed away in the hospital, but baby Callan passed away 3 days later due to his injuries. Lindsay's defense attorney claims that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis, which led her to break from reality and murder her children. But the state attorney argues that these killings were premeditated and that Lindsay sent her husband husband to get food on purpose so that she can commit these crimes. However, Dr. Caney, who is a board member of Postpartum Support International, clarified that women can completely break with reality during violent episodes. She also said that women who are a few weeks postpartum should be aware of the symptoms of psychosis, which is usually hallucinating. Lindsay was charged with 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation and assault, and battery with a deadly weapon. And get this, she's currently paralyzed from the waist down after jumping out the window.
This is a game show that aired in Peru, right? And it's called The Value of Truth. And the concept of the show was pretty simple to follow. Contestants would be asked a series of questions while being connected to a polygraph test. The more questions that they answer truthfully, they got money. And there's a twist to it too. The contestants will have to be next to loved ones. Damn, questions.
And they will probably ask questions about
around the loved ones, bro. And then in 2012, when the first episode aired, a 19-year-old girl who starred in it, and her name was Ruth Talia Sayas. She's with her mom, dad, and her boyfriend. The first couple questions, they're pretty easy to answer. She answers them truthfully, and then as the episode keeps going, they get even worse. Like they ask her,
¿Estás con tu enamorado hasta que llegue alguien mejor?
It's the first question that f***ed it up, right?
Sí.
¿Trabajas en un nightclub?
Sí.
¿Has aceptado dinero a cambio de tener relaciones sexuales?
they ask her another question and she refuses to answer. She basically ends the game there. And then after the show aired, it was a big hit, got high ratings and stuff. Ruth, she became like a low-key, like a little celebrity in Peru and stuff like that. She was on many interviews on the news, interviewed by other television programs and stuff. And then out of nowhere, she just disappears, bro. 10 days of her friends and family are out looking for her. And then they eventually find her body in the vacant lot, buried and stuff. The main suspect was the boyfriend. And only cause she was...
These people might be freed soon in 2023. Number 1, we have Rachel Shoaf. In 2012, a 16-year-old Rachel along with her friend Sheila Eddy decided they no longer want to be friends with another girl named Skylar Neese. However, instead of just communicating and talking to Skylar about their thoughts, they decided to lure her out of her house in the early hours of July 6, 2012. Skylar thought nothing of it and believed that she was simply hanging out with 2 of her best friends. The 2 took her to some woods 30 miles away where they would stab her to death. What's more disturbing is that Rachel and Sheila even talked to Skylar's parents and helped them during the search days after the killing. It would be 6 months later when Rachel finally confessed to the horrible deed they had committed. Her parole hearing has been delayed to May 9, 2023, and currently there are 31,000 people who signed a petition on change.org to deny her parole.
You said yourself, Your Honor, this is first-degree murder. She should not give any leniency, and she can take her apologies and everything else and sit on them because that's about what they're worth.
You stood there for over a year, comforting, being with us, telling us you knew nothing. When the police and everybody was coming close, then you decided to confess.
Number 2, we have Paul Denyer, dubbed the Frankston serial killer because he brutally attacked and slit the throats of 3 young women in Melbourne, 1993. He has had a history of breaking into neighbors' apartments, cutting up their furniture, clothing, and even writing blood on their walls. Ironically, in prison, Denyer began to identify as the very thing he despised, a woman. He was given 3 life sentences, but because of a technicality during his sentencing, he's eligible for parole after 30 years, which basically means sometime this year. Date of the parole hearing is still unknown.
Montgomery County 911, where's your emergency?
I stabbed myself and I killed my 2 children.
You stabbed yourself and killed your 2 children?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what's your name?
Brandy Worley.
Brandy what?
Worley.
And where are the children at?
In my daughter's room, on the floor.
In your daughter's room on the floor? Okay. And what caused you to do this today?
My husband wanted a divorce and wanted to take my kid. I won't let him have my kid.
Okay, and how old are your children?
7 and 3.
Okay. And where did you stab yourself at?
In the neck.
Okay, are you bleeding?
Yeah, there's blood everywhere.
Okay, and where are you at?
In my living room.
You're in your living room?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and are you armed now with the knife still?
No, it's in my children's room.
Okay, where's your husband at?
Downstairs somewhere.
Okay, what's his condition?
I don't know. I haven't talked to him.
And what are you feeling right now? I mean, you're tired? Are you where?
Yeah, I took a lot of Benadryl.
You took a lot of Benadryl?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone should know about what has happened to Lauren Heike. Lauren was a 29-year-old esthetician and was hiking near her home in North Phoenix. 24 hours later, she was found murdered off a trail west of Scottsdale Road and Mile Boulevard. Almost immediately, authorities released this footage of a suspect running from the area. This person has since been identified as 22-year-old Zion Teasley. He was arrested at the Scottsdale home he shared with his mother, less than a mile from the scene. We now know that Lauren was followed and then chased down the Route 11 trail before being viciously attacked from behind. She suffered 15 stab wounds to the back and chest, but tried her hardest to put up a fight, with defensive wounds to her arms and her hands. Tragically, investigators believe that she eventually escaped, but her injuries were too severe to keep going. On the trail, police have found Lauren's belongings scattered, presumably dropped as she was running for her life. Her clothing suggested that at one point the chase went through a barbed wire fence, and it was actually DNA in her shoe that led to Zion's arrest. When police submitted this DNA sample, Zion's name came up in court records. Detectives then went to his former workplace, where his ex-coworkers recognized his clothing as merchandise that had been stolen from the store. They said he'd recently been fired for being aggressive towards female employees. Zion has since admitted to detectives that, like Lauren, he frequented the area. He identified himself as the man in the footage, and when shown a picture of Lauren, said that he, quote, wanted to look like her. He also reportedly spoke about growing up as a Christian, struggling with his sexuality, and how he hadn't been with anyone in a while. Finally, we know that in 2020, Zion was charged with robbery, kidnapping, and disorderly conduct, but was listed as a medium-low risk to reoffend and got a plea deal. He was released in November of 2022 and actually met with his probation officer after the murder. Interestingly, his mother works for a local county's probation department. So as of today, Zion is listed as a flight risk with a bail set at $1 million. Obviously, this is nothing short of terrifying, and it's a case that young women everywhere need to be aware of.
Update, Jade's ruining the vacations with her TikToks.
That was the last TikTok ever posted by TikToker Anthony Barajas, aka Anthony Michael. On July 26, 2021, Anthony and his friend Riley were seeing a movie. On that evening, they were seeing the ironically violent film The Forever Purge, which itself is a critique on American violence. On that day, the two of them were just sitting inside of the theater enjoying the film when suddenly they were both shot in the back of the head. Now, sadly, Riley Goodrich, who was 18 at the time, would die at the scene, but Anthony, who was 19 at the time, was taken to a hospital but passed away a few days later. But why did this happen? Well, it's not a very clear story. So this is Joseph Jimenez, and he was actually arrested the day after the murder. He was the guy who pulled the trigger. Now, Joseph's friends were actually in the movie theater. There were only 6 people in the theater at the time. And they said that during the movie, Joseph was acting strange. He was mumbling to himself, and at one point he left the theater and came back in with some sort of a package. Joseph's friends then left the theater because they were afraid of what he might do, and a few moments later they saw Joseph running out of the side door, getting into his vehicle and speeding away. So it turns out that Joseph had just randomly decided to murder Riley and Anthony. There was no motivation, he didn't know these two, he just decided he had to kill somebody. And strangely, their bodies weren't discovered until after the movie was over, because there was only 6 people in the theater, including Joseph, his 3 friends, and these two. So according to Joseph, he was hearing voices that were saying his friends and family were going to be killed if he didn't take a life. He also stated that he wished he didn't do it, but unfortunately, you can't take back an action like that. It's just chilling that even just sitting in a movie theater, an act of violence like this can strike you. And obviously, rest in peace to Riley and Anthony. This is such a tragic story.
You can do it.
Step after step, he asks her to move towards him, until...
When I saw it with my own eyes, I thought, how can I deny it, you know?
What Gerald doesn't know at the time is that the woman in the wheelchair, who stood and walked among the crowd, was actually one of Joan's secretaries, hired for the spectacle.
My personal feelings with Jim Jones were always good ones. I always thought he was handsome. Just watching him, I would just be mesmerized.
Some people see a great deal of God in my body. They see Christ in me, a hope of glory.
But when I got old enough to realize the difference between good and bad, I noticed that all of the meetings weren't happy meetings.
Every Wednesday, Jim Jones offers a different kind of meeting to his followers. He calls them catharsis, the purging of evil.
If you got caught talking to people that were not affiliated with the church, then you would be in trouble for that.
Members, even children, could be called to the front and be hit repeatedly with a paddle, while the entire congregation is made to laugh at you.
I would find myself looking around at all the adults, thinking to myself, you can't think this is okay. You just can't. I was scared to do anything wrong because I was scared I was going to be called up and be beaten.
As the Parks family is getting ready to follow Jim Jones to Guyana, Tracy is deeply troubled.
I can't figure out for the life of me why my parents went when the red flags were here.
I want to give you more than I have. I want you to be greater than I am. And if you don't want to go this route, then go to hell where you want to, but don't bother me.
I remember landing in a little plane on the Port Kaituma airstrip that's not very far from Jonestown.
As Tracy gets off the plane with her family, the air is so thick and so hot, she can hardly breathe. The family now has to board a tractor to be taken to Jonestown.
When we came up on them gates, they were standing there with guns. And at that moment, I knew I had just entered the gates of hell.
I said, I feel like I'm making the biggest mistake of my life.
Right away, Tracy and her family are stripped from all of their belongings, including their passports. Then, Tracy is separated from her parents.
They told my parents right then and there, she's going to be staying in the kids' area and you guys are going to be going to your own cottage. I was devastated.
According to Jim Jones, family bonds are selfish. But the truth is, he wants to turn family members against one another. And the best way to do that is to isolate them. Already, Tracy's father Gerald knows he's made a mistake. The next morning, while walking around the grounds, Gerald runs into his own cousin.
And she said, how do you like Jonestown? I said, I don't.
This is one of those cases that doesn't sit right with me. This is Dorothy Jane Scott. She was murdered in the 1980s, and for years, the killer tormented her family with phantom phone calls. And to this day, they are still out there somewhere. So let's dive into the story. So the story of Dorothy's disappearance is really strange. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy drove two of her friends to the hospital, as one of them had been bitten by a spider that night. So at the end of the hospital visit, while they were waiting to get a prescription filled, Dorothy Jane walked to go grab her car and bring it up so that the two friends could meet her outside. And once they were outside, the friends saw Dorothy's car coming towards them, but it quickly sped off and left them there. Now, they couldn't see who exactly was in the car, who was driving, because the headlights blinded them, but in a few hours, they reported her missing because they couldn't get in contact with Dorothy. And she would be missing for years. So in the months leading up to her murder, Dorothy had acquired a stalker. She had been receiving phone calls at work from a strange, unidentified male caller. And on these phone calls, this guy would tell her how much he loved her, and then he would state that he intended on killing her soon. One day, this phantom man even told Dorothy to go outside because he left a surprise on her car, and when she went outside to look, there was a single dead rose on her windshield, which is very creepy. On one of these particularly gruesome phone calls, the caller even stated that he planned on abducting Dorothy and chopping her up into little bits so that no one would ever find her. So these phone calls obviously terrified Dorothy, and in the week leading up to her disappearance, she started taking karate lessons. Okay, so let's flash back to the night that Dorothy disappeared. Remember, her friends were waiting for her outside of the hospital when they saw her car speed by them, but they couldn't see who was inside the vehicle. At around 4:30 a.m. that morning, 5 hours or so after they saw her car speeding away, the car was found abandoned in an alleyway 10 miles from the hospital, and it was on fire, which torched all evidence that could have been in the vehicle. So Dorothy would be missing for years, 4 years in fact. But it only took 1 week after her disappearance for the killer to start calling her own parents. So about every Wednesday afternoon for a period after Dorothy went missing, this caller would call her parents and say the strangest things. He would tell them things like, "I have her." He would also claim that he was the one who killed Dorothy. He was basically tormenting her parents and saying that he knows exactly where she is and what had happened, but he was never going to tell them. Now, 4 years later, this was going on for 4 years, in April of 1984, this caller once again called Dorothy's family, but instead of her mom picking up the phone that night, her dad did. And after her dad picked up the phone calls completely stopped. That is, until a few months later. Now, in August of 1984, a construction worker would come across a set of bones that belonged to a human and a dog. And those bones were eventually revealed to be those of Dorothy's. And immediately after her remains were found, the caller once again began to call her parents. This time the police installed a recorder that bugged the family's phones. They were trying to get this guy's voice on recording and trace the phone calls, but the calls were never long enough for them to trace, and they still had no idea who this guy was. To this day, authorities still don't know how Dorothy died. And even though the phone calls eventually stopped, the killer's never been brought to justice. Now, the only suspect that's ever emerged in this case still doesn't have a name. It's the same guy that called, obviously, Dorothy's family, but it was a man who called a local newspaper just a few days after Dorothy went missing. And on this phone call, this guy said that he loved Dorothy, she had been cheating on him, and that he was the one who killed her. So that means that to this day, this killer is probably still out there somewhere, and they've never been brought to justice. This crime occurred over 40 years ago. There are no leads, and I don't think that this is a case that will ever be solved. If this killer dies, I'm sure that they're going to take this secret to the grave with them.
Pay attention to the girl looking straight into the camera. To most people, Annette Craver looks like a regular teenage girl, but something isn't quite right. Her mother, Mary Rose, noticed that her daughter wasn't the same since she returned from a recent trip to California. What she doesn't know is that, while over there, her innocent daughter tied the knot with a serial killer. In 1983, 43-year-old Felix Vale, a cult leader, manipulator, and serial killer, married 17-year-old Annette Craver, putting her entire being under his control.
There was nothing in her eyes. There was no personality there. It was like a zombie.
But the teenager still had enough sense in her to try to overcome her tyrannical husband.
She said, "I'm leaving, Felix. I want a divorce. I'm going back to school."
But this was too little too late, because Annette disappeared shortly after, leaving no clues behind. Frustrated by the local police's lack of action, Mary Rose, Annette's mother, launched her own investigation, but no one expected how far she was ready to go to find her daughter and stop her son-in-law's killing spree.
And she threw out a machete, and I'm like, what in the world have I gotten myself into?
You didn't worry about the risks. I don't worry about the risk. I just wanted to know the truth.
September 8th, 1981. It was the end of the summer in Houston, Texas. 15-year-old Annette and her mother Mary were having a yard sale to sell off the last remaining items belonging to Annette's late father, who died in a car crash 2 years prior. Unbeknownst to Mary, her daughter was still struggling with the loss of her father.
This is your friend Annette, and here is your long-awaited tape. Hope you like it.
She spent a lot of time alone. She was always writing poetry and drawing, picked up the guitar.
This kind of solitude and isolation concerned Mary.
Annette, I'm sure, missed her dad more than I realized. I even asked her one time if she thought she needed to see someone to talk, and she said, "No, Mom, I'm fine."
But the truth was that, behind her mother's back, Annette made a new friend, a charming, yet much older man she met in the city. At 40 years old, Felix Vale was even older than Mary herself, so when he showed up at the yard sale, talking it up to her daughter, she didn't think of him as a potential threat.
I think I may have seen him on his motorcycle. He was just another customer.
Mary was very preoccupied at the time. Since the death of Annette's father, she simply couldn't find any work in Houston. She needed to move away to be able to provide for her daughter, but lacked the money to do so, until an opportunity arose in the neighboring state in Oklahoma. The only issue was that Annette, who had already skipped 2 grades, was about to graduate from high school, and Mary knew that moving away could compromise her progress. So she decided to leave her in the care of a friend for a few months, while she temporarily left for work, a decision she'd later come to regret when she learned that the mysterious stranger she met at the yard sale was getting closer and closer to her underage daughter.
She did mention in letters that Felix stopped by, but I didn't know that there was intimacy. And then I learned that Felix made many, many visits. I regret that I left, and she even said to me in a letter, "I feel like you abandoned me."
With Mary away, Felix easily manipulated Annette and convinced her to go on a road trip with him after her graduation. Meanwhile, Mary saved money for months and was eager to announce to her daughter that she bought a house for them under both of their names. Finally, they would be able to live together again. When she learned that Annette already left, Mary was devastated.
Oh my gosh, why didn't I do this differently? All the decisions I made that I would do differently now.
For an entire year, she tried to get in touch with her daughter. She eventually got a few letters, but never from the same place, until the day she received a dreaded call from Annette asking for her approval to marry Felix in California.
I said, why don't you wait till you turn 18? This is a big...
This woman killed a bunch of kids in Africa and is now acting like a victim. Just a couple days ago, HBO came out with a documentary about her.
What is feeling called by God? What is that like? Baby I just started to see malnutrition everywhere. So many children came seeking help. We decided to make a malnutrition rehab center.
Yeah, except she was 19 at the time she set up this center and pretended to be a doctor. And 105 children died. So when she was 18, she went there with her church group. Then the next year, she decided to come back and do things on her own, saying that this is a calling from God. It was a very, very profound feeling. It's like hard to describe in words though. Except the charity she set up was not backed by any governmental program. No US-based group was supporting this. The church was not involved. She literally just moved there and did this. She would wear a lab coat and a stethoscope around her neck all the time. She was treating children on a daily basis for 8 years, performing blood transfusions, inserting catheters, disregarding sanitary protocols, diagnosing patients with AIDS. And of course, when Fox News interviews her, they put heinous crimes in quotes as if it wasn't a heinous crime. She was saying it's a Christian nonprofit, but it wasn't backed by any church. At first, it was providing free meals to families in need. Then she just started to treat children for free for malnutrition, peppering the website with Bible verses, and this on top of wearing a stethoscope and a lab coat. These people had no idea that she was not legit. Prima Kogala was working on the behalf of the mothers who lost their children due to this malpractice of this doctor, who was not a doctor whatsoever, was just a teenager. Yeah. Prima says that Renee targeted these mothers who had malnourished kids. They didn't have the language to explain the violations that were happening to them. They can't write, they can't read, they could never understand the healthcare system. She would administer drugs through IVs and write prescriptions. She was not medically trained at all. Someone who worked at the facility was saying on average, I would drive at least 7 to 10 dead bodies of children back to their villages each week. This mother is just one of many who brought their children to the center thinking that it was an actual Christian group who was going to feed her child and get them nice, fat, and healthy. She says that he was tended to out of her sight and then he died just days later. She never received a single explanation as to what happened to him. Then she would take pictures of these dying children and put them on the website to ask for more money. The problem is HBO is calling this a 3-part docuseries that examines the thorny complexities of foreign work aid done in the name of humanitarian and religious ideals. No, she impersonated a doctor and made these people believe she was one and then killed 100 children. There, I fixed it for you. A lot of other people are pissed about the way HBO is approaching this, saying she killed 100 babies in the process of this horrible thing and she settled in Ugandan court. And we're still asking about her intentions and if she's a murderer? You should cancel this documentary, HBO.
You do things as if she was a medical personnel. She was not qualified to do this.
They were not licensed as a medical center.
DIY, that's what you call it.
She's now 30 years old and is being sued by Ugandan court. She's just back living in Virginia. The documentary is called Savior Complex if you want to watch it, and she definitely has white savior complex. I see that term thrown around quite a bit, and sometimes it's unwarranted and kind of unfair, but this is the textbook example of that.
Renee is being put up as an angel. People back in America think she's awesome. They're giving her money. Angels like Renee bring death.
This woman should be charged and in prison. She chronicled her experiences in a blog that people followed. The way that she writes her experiences in this blog is so disgusting. When I pulled back the covering, my eyes widened. For under the blanket lied a small but very, very swollen, pale baby girl. Her breaths were frighteningly low. The baby's name is Patricia. She is 9 months old. God, if you've ever been to a Protestant church, you know that would get them going. That right there is their version of porn. I cannot believe she got away with it. And there are so many other stories about these mothers, obviously because of over 100 mothers lost their children. None of them ever knew what happened to their children either. Their kids were literally just dropped off at their house, dead. And they were like, see ya! A person who worked at the facility said that she would base her diagnoses off of gut feelings. How is she free? Honestly, I hope people get riled up by this, especially watch the documentary and realize what's actually going on so that she doesn't get away with this, because she should definitely not be free. Follow for more tea.